The desert evening pressed down like a weary hand, its last light turning the horizon into a thin blade of gold. Along the rancher's far fence line, a lone figure staggered, tall, proud by nature, yet now bent by suffering. Her breath rattled as though scraped against stone. Fever glazed her eyes, and every step seemed borrowed from a life already fading. When her legs finally gave out, she fell hard, sending up a small sigh of dust that drifted over her like a burial shroud. She lay unmoving, save for a faint flutter of her fingers, an instinctive refusal to surrender. Even in collapse, there was something fierce in the set of her jaw, some remnant of the Apache huntress she had been before hunger hollowed her eyes. The wind dragged thin spirals of sand across her body, as though the desert were already rehearsing her funeral rites. On the lonely plains, where most creatures perish unseen, she remained, breathing, barely. A testament to endurance stretched beyond human limits. The mare moved with the slow resignation of an old creature that had seen too many summers. Her hooves pressed shallow impressions into the dust, each step kicking up a faint halo of light brown powder. The poor rancher, lean, sunburned, and wearing the look of a man who'd carried too many quiet burdens, rode with a tired stoop in his shoulders. The evening light stretched long across the plain, thin as beaten copper. Shadows pooled in the gullies like spilled ink. He was thinking of the broken fence line he still had to mend before dark, the mounting debts that clawed at the edges of every choice, and the stubborn ache in his ribs from last week's fall off the roan gelding. Then he saw her. At first, she was nothing more than a dark shape slumped near the far post, another heap of desert refuse the wind had gathered. But the closer he rode, the clearer her outline became, tall, lean, unmistakably human. His mare halted without command, ears twitching. The rancher narrowed his eyes, breath tightening. He knew what it meant for an Apache woman to be found alone on his land, nothing good, whichever way the story turned. He dismounted slowly, boots grinding against the dry earth. Her body lay twisted, half-curled, as if sleep had finally dragged her down in the midst of escape. Her braids were loose, tangled with dust and blood. Her skin bore the blistered touch of too many days in the sun. But there was still strength in her jawline, still defiance in the set of her brow. He swallowed hard. Old instincts told him to turn away, pretend he hadn't seen her, leave her fate to the coyotes and the merciless night. The world was simpler when a man didn't owe kindness to strangers who might bring warriors down upon him. But something in her posture, rigid even in unconsciousness, refusing collapse until the last breath, caught him. It reminded him of someone he once knew. Someone buried under a cottonwood tree behind the barn. Wind brushed past him, carrying a faint rattle of dry grass. He clenched his jaw. "Damn it," he muttered softly, the words slipping out like a confession. He knelt beside her, pressing two fingers lightly to her throat. A faint pulse thudded back, thin, exhausted, but stubbornly alive. He exhaled, the decision forming before he could gather his reasons to resist it. He lifted her carefully, surprised by her weight, light but taut with wiry strength. Her head fell against his shoulder, hot with fever. His mare shifted as he hoisted her into the saddle, the leather creaking under unfamiliar burden. He mounted behind her, steadying her body with one arm. The horizon darkened to bruised purple as he turned the mare toward home. He knew exactly what he was inviting into his life. He knew the dangers. He chose it anyway. And with that simple act, quiet, reluctant, irrevocable, the first spark of a war he never wanted was set alight. The rancher stood for a long moment beneath the slow-fading dusk, the huntress's weight slack in his arms. Her breath came in thin, rasping threads, as though each one required negotiation with the world. The wind pressed sand against his boots, urging him back toward the cabin before the night claimed her entirely. He shifted her carefully and stepped inside. The little cabin, long accustomed to silence, seemed to draw a quiet breath of its own as he carried her to the cot that once held his wife. The wood creaked, not in protest, but in memory. He laid the tall Apache Huntress down, tucking the blanket around her with a gentleness he hadn't felt in years. Outside, the desert night gathered like dark cloth, folding over the land, holding everything still. Inside, two broken histories rested beneath one roof, unaware yet of the storm they had just invited. The Huntress woke to the faint creak of floorboards and the dry rasp of wind against the shutters. Her vision swam. Shapes blurred, then steadied, wooden walls, a single lantern, a cot that wasn't hers. Her hand moved before thought, finding the small knife the rancher had set beside her. She gripped it like a final thread to the world she knew. The poor rancher paused in the doorway. He carried no weapon, only a tin cup of water and a plate of cornbread. He set them on the table without a word, the way a man might approach a skittish mare, slow, sidestepping pride, letting silence do the work. When his eyes met hers, he didn't flinch from the sharpness there. He simply nodded once, an invitation for her to choose. She didn't lower the knife, but her breathing steadied. Hunger won where trust could not. She reached for the cornbread, ate with small, guarded bites. He stepped back, keeping distance, as though physical space could shelter them both from whatever history hung between their peoples. The quiet between them was long, but not empty. It was a kind of trial, one neither spoke, but both endured. And slowly, in that stillness, the fear softened just enough to let the first thread of an uneasy truce take hold. Night draped the cabin like a velvet curtain, soft and absolute. The wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the scent of dry sage and distant mesquite. She lay half-sitting, shoulders trembling with exhaustion, and hummed a low, almost imperceptible Apache morning song. Each note was a fragile thread weaving grief into the still air. He listened, memories surfacing unbidden. His wife had once translated the song's sorrowful meaning, a lament for lost kin, for lives scattered by fire and gun. In quiet homage, he placed a carved wooden horse near her cot, its polished surface catching the dim lantern glow. She studied it without a word, eyes softening, recognition flickering like dawn over the desert horizon. At dawn, the ranch lay under a veil of soft gold, the mesas beyond gilded in the first light. He moved quietly along the creek bed, eyes tracing the sand for signs. Fresh horse tracks marred the smooth surface, hoofprints deep and deliberate, cutting across his property as though the land had been surveyed by unseen eyes. Inside, she sensed the change before he spoke. Her gaze met his, sharp and alert, understanding immediately. Fingers deftly braided her hair back, movements precise, disciplined. The silence between them held a new weight. Outside peace had become fragile, threaded with the promise of confrontation that neither could ignore. The storm arrived without warning, thick, rolling clouds gathering over the plains like a great, dark congregation. Thunder pressed against the cabin walls, each rumble a distant memory threatening to surface. Rain hissed against the roof, filling the silence they had shared for days. She sat near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket he had placed around her shoulders. For a long while she stared into the flames as if reading a message hidden in the embers. Then, her voice broke the quiet, not loud, not steady, but shaped by truth she had carried alone for too long. "My band was taken at dawn," she murmured. "Rifles, fire, horses that did not stop." Her fingers tightened. "My sister ran toward me. They cut her down before she reached my hands." He swallowed hard. Loss recognized loss. "My wife, she died while I was away," he said softly. I returned to an empty bed. Between them, the storm raged, but neither looked away. Morning broke with a pale, forgiving light, washing the ranch in muted amber. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and breathing, as though the land itself had exhaled with them. She rose before he did, moving with a quiet resolve that seemed carved from the same stone as the mesas beyond. Without asking, she stepped into the yard and approached the corral. The horses, restless from the night's thunder, calmed at her presence. She checked their hooves, murmuring soft words in her native tongue, steadying, respectful. When he appeared on the porch, she was already mending the broken fence rail, her hands swift and practiced. He tried to protest, but she shook her head once, firm. "This place kept me alive," she said softly. "Let me keep it standing." The simplicity of the offer struck deeper than any vow. The afternoon light thinned into a pale, unforgiving amber when she halted in the doorway, shoulders tightening. Far beyond the fence line, where the land swelled into a low ridge, a line of silhouettes emerged, slow at first, then unmistakably deliberate. A dozen riders, moving in formation, their dust rising in a long plume behind them like smoke from an unseen fire. He stepped beside her, jaw setting as he counted the shapes one by one. These weren't scouts. These were men arriving with purpose. Her breath slowed. She recognized the pattern of their spacing, mercenaries, bounty takers, not her people. The fragile peace inside the ranch cracked, quiet as bone under strain. The noon sun hung like a molten coin above the homestead, its heat pressing down on the earth until the very air trembled. The riders approached in a long, dusty line, 12 silhouettes, rough men with hard eyes, their horses restless beneath them. Dust rolled behind them like a warning cloud. The rancher stepped outside before they reached the gate, boots sinking slightly into the brittle soil. There was no bravado in his stance, only a weary, bone-deep steadiness, as if this moment had been waiting for him far longer than he had been waiting for it. Their leader dismounted first, spitting into the dirt. "Hand her over," he said. "There's a bounty on her kind. We ain't ridin' off empty-handed." Behind him, inside the cabin's open doorway, she stood silent, torn between stepping forward or melting into shadow. Her bow rested against the frame, fingers hovering but not gripping. The rancher's voice, when it came, was low and even. "She's under my roof. That means she's under my protection." A dangerous stillness followed. Hands drifted toward gun belts. The horses snorted, uneasy. He didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't have to. The conviction in his stance, rooted in compassion, not threat, held them like a drawn line in the dust. For a heartbeat too long, no one breathed. Then the leader cursed under his breath and signaled his men back. No shots fired. But the promise of future violence clung to the air like a storm yet to break. The second wave of riders appeared as the sun dipped low, their silhouettes stretched long across the valley floor. Dust rose behind them in a muted plume, as though the land itself were warning of their return. The rancher stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely, his breath steady but waited. She came beside him without being called. Her bow hung at her side, arrows fanned like dark prayers across her back. No tremor touched her hands. No fear clouded her gaze. What stood there was not a rescued stranger, but a huntress choosing her ground. For a moment, they said nothing. The silence between them, once awkward, once foreign, now felt like a vow made in the language of shared suffering. When the riders slowed, uncertain, she drew an arrow and raised it with calm precision. Together, they formed a single, immovable line. Together, they made the men hesitate, then retreat. Winter rolled in without cruelty, settling gently over the ranch like an old friend lowering its voice. Snow softened the edges of the world, muting every footstep, every remembered sorrow. Together they worked the land, her tracks beside his in the frost, parallel, patient, unhurried. There were still nights when ghosts pressed close, but they met them without fear now. Their pasts no longer hung like chains, they had become shared burdens, lightened by another set of hands. In the hush of those months, something unspoken took root. The silence between them was no longer a barrier. It was home.